My name is Lauren Schoenberg. Welcome to the Musicians Show. Our special guest for the next 3 Wednesday evenings, Mel Lewis, and a reprise of a show we did about 6 or 7 years ago on the history of jazz drums. And we're going to take our time and get into detail and learn and listen a lot from Mel Lewis. Let's begin with something from the second to last Mel Lewis record. The most recent one is the Soft Lights and Hot Music. The one before that, another great one on the Atlantic label, the Mel Lewis Orchestra, 20 Years at the Village Vanguard. And from that album, let's hear Thad Jones' arrangement of All of Me. Mel Lewis and the Jazz Orchestra from the album 20 Years at the Village Vanguard on the Atlantic record label. That was recorded in March 1985. I was at the session, but that was not an important thing that I was at that session. The important thing is that the gentleman right here was at the session because it was his band playing, and that's Mel Lewis and the Jazz Orchestra. We heard Thad Jones' arrangement of All of Me with Ralph Lulama on the tenor saxophone and that great ensemble. Welcome back.
Yeah, here we are again. That's was it been that long since we did the drum shows?
We started the drum shows, I think, in late '82, and I think they went over into '83 and maybe into early '84.
Those were nice.
Yeah, those were very good, and as you know, a lot of drummers wanted tapes of those shows, and they really circulated around. And one of the unfortunate after effects or products of was the fact that I actually lost some of my original tapes because I lent them to people, and Lord knows what happened to them. So since I had so many requests to do it again with Mel, it just seemed right that we just do it again instead of trying to rebroadcast some old shows.
Yeah, well, I probably would have new things to say anyway, or a different approach to some of the stuff because your mind changes as time goes on. Mm-hmm. Or a thought that you forgot then comes up now. Yeah. So it can't hurt.
No, it won't hurt, definitely. We'll be here this Wednesday, the following Wednesday, and the following Wednesday after that with the history of jazz drums. Right away, I want to stress that if you're a jazz fan or a drummer or a jazz drummer fan or a fan of the drums or just a jazz hound in general, chances are there's going to be a drummer that you're going to want to hear that we're not going to get to. So we can ask you right now to save the phone calls. Why didn't you play any records by Don Lamont or whoever the person might be? There's so many great drummers. You have to draw the line somewhere. And I want to take responsibility at the beginning. I selected the drummers that we're talking about after talking with Mel. So that's where that lies.
Well, we can't play everybody. I mean, if we could, we'd be here. Well, we'd be here for a year.
Yeah.
A year of Wednesdays rather than 3 weeks. I mean, you just can't hit it all. So what you try and do is try and hit the main, the influences, the people who were very important, extremely important to the world of drumming. There are a lot of wonderful drummers out there. That have gone by the way. I mean, they're gone. We've lost them, and of course, a lot of you young guys out there have never heard them. You never heard of them, and a lot of you are going to be surprised, especially you young rock drummers. If you're listening, you're going to hear things that you thought was new. I mean, you thought, and you're going to find out that this stuff is all old hat. It all came from way back there.
Yeah, we're going to strike a balance, between the seminal innovators, the handful of drummers who actually changed the way the music was played and influenced everyone, and drummers who might not have been an innovator, but people who were great drummers that you might not have heard of, people like Tiny Khan or Ike Day or Harold Doc West or Ben Pollock or folks like that we'll be mentioning and playing recordings of. So,
yeah, it'll be nice.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. 12 minutes after 6, again, Lawrence Schoenberg here with Mel Lewis. And we should mention, of course, Mel, as Ted Pankin very to the point mentioned before, it's one thing to listen to the radio and listen to records. The big thing is you have to get out there and support the live jazz scene.
That's it.
And, of course, Mel is well into his it's beginning the 23rd or 4th?
No, we'll be starting the 24th year.
24th year.
We're finishing our 23rd year now. We'll celebrate that.
Of Mondays down at the Village Vanguard. And, of course, you can always hear Mel on Mondays at the Vanguard and in many, many other settings and many other places, including this week, surprise.
Yeah, this week, surprise, I'm going to work at the Fortune Pavilion with Steve Kuhn and Ron Carter. Al Foster got a fast call away, so they called me to come in and work with them.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
You'll be there tonight?
Tonight, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Oh.
Sunday's possible. Check by calling.
Okay, so that's where you can go hear Mel this week. If you hear the shows, want to go say hello, something like that, or check out one of the great drummers. Of course, one of the one of the things that happens when you do a show on great drummers with Mel Lewis is that one of the drummers that you don't get to in the history of jazz drumming is Mel Lewis, but that's been remedied by the fact that we've done many shows on Mel's career and Mel's recordings, and will undoubtedly be doing more. So in the same way that Alec Wilder's book on American popular song omitted Alec Wilder from the artists, Mel will come up in another show. Well, let's begin, and we'll get underway with two gentlemen, two drummers out of the New Orleans school, born right around the turn of the century, both whom had early important associations with Louis Armstrong, and through him and through their own great artistry are recognized as two of the all-time drummers way back at the beginning who influenced, well, drummers right up till today through many other drummers. We'll begin with Warren Baby Dodds. Warren Baby Dodds was the younger brother of the Dodds brothers. His older brother was Johnny Dodds, who was a legendary clarinetist and person who played a lot with King Oliver and Louis Armstrong, and led his own groups in Chicago after moving to Chicago. And Baby Dodds was his drummer, was his brother, and also the drummer with him frequently. We're going to begin with an unaccompanied drum improvisation that Baby Dodds recorded in 1946. So let's just hear it. Baby Dodds by himself, and we'll come back and discuss it with Mel Lewis.
Warren Baby Dodds. Now we look. Now he's playing on a complete drum set there, except that he's added certain percussion instruments that were more prevalent back in the early days than they would have been in 1946. But that was a trademark in a way for him. So when he, because he had to play a drum solo. Now, how many a youngster today would never even consider to play a whole solo on the rims? Because that solo was played on the rims of the bass drum, the snare drum, which had wooden hoop. I could tell by the sound, because there was no metal sound, that they were wooden rims on the snare drum, which a lot of the old timers used. They preferred, especially snare drummers, guys who played the New Orleans style of drumming, including Ray Baduke and George Wedeling and them. They all used wooden, and Ray McKinley. They used wooden rimmed snare drums on the top because they did a lot of that playing, and you didn't have, it gave you another sound. That was a tap dance. That was in no way anything but an excellent tap dance. And there was all kinds of little staggered tricks and all that on the cowbells. He had a variety of cowbells hooked together so that he could slide off of. He was sliding off of them, and I enjoy. I know what he's doing, but actually he was dancing. That was a total dance, and it was in perfect time all the way. It was done on the drums were definitely calf skins on them. It was an old set of drums from that period. The cowbells were tuned beautifully. They all had lovely sounds, and he knew exactly what he was going to get out of each rim he used.
Right.
See, so I mean, he knew his drums. He knew the setup. He stayed away from cymbals pretty much, And when you could hear the cymbals were not the best anyway. You could hear that they were not. But he wasn't a cymbal man. I mean, he was a very,
Right.
not to be funny. He wasn't a cymbal man. He was a drum player, and somebody could say you could call that New Orleans drumming. I wouldn't call it New Orleans drumming. I would call it tap dancing. That was a dance.
One thing that struck me from the beginning was with the bass drum, and there was a sense of a tonality there.
Oh, there is.
I mean, I heard in my head some kind of region of pitch kind of thing.
The bass drum was on the tighter side.
Yeah.
Which when you're dealing with calf anyway, you don't always have control.
Right.
You can't always get it where you want it. So he might, if it was in a dry studio or in a room or on a hot day, and or in the wintertime, which is worse,
Right.
with the dry heat. Sometimes the bass drum gets so tight you can't do anything about it. I'm sure that was not a little bass drum either.
No, I'm sure
It was a big one, but it didn't have the biggest sound, but it had a pure sound, and there was no muffling in it.
Yeah.
And I could hear that, and of course, but he had. Did you notice that every stroke, I mean the level, it was absolutely even all the way.
Yeah. You mean when he
Which
was
is
striking all the different or on the
Yeah.
bass drum you're talking about?
Yeah, the bass drum.
Oh yeah, it was so controlled.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's.
That's a
See,
lost art. Isn't
Oh,
it?
sure. That's because nobody knows how to play their bass drums today. I mean, they were taught that you don't play the bass drum. I mean, foolishly. That's where the swing. Well, I mean, that was the beat. Yeah, he played over that.
Right.
I mean, it's so foolish. And the young drum. I mean, the fusion drummer today thinks his bass drum is only to play patterns with, but he can't play 4 beats to the bar with it. He can't. He doesn't even know how. He has trouble doing it. But they can play all these tricks. What that man just did was difficult. Playing 1, 2, 3, 4 for a period of 3-4 minutes without wavering.
Right. And
And-
even. Yeah.
And with the same level. I mean, the volume on the bass drum, no matter what he did dynamically with his hands, the bass drum dynamically remained the same. That's control. Now, he could have played it softer than that or louder than that. But he set it at a level, and he
Right.
kept it there.
Right. Right now, let's move in here. Baby Dodds, Warren Baby Dodds, with a band. And this is a special recording band that was put together by Sidney Bechet in Chicago in September 1940. The Ellington Band, of which Bechet had been a member way back when, was in town, so he borrowed Rex Stewart from the Duke Ellington Band and some old friends who were based in Chicago. Earl Hines is on piano, bassist Johnny Lindsay, and Boucher and Rex Stewart and Warren Baby Dodds playing an Ellington tune. This is Stompy Jones, and although it's not the most typical selection for Warren Baby Dodds in terms of the mostly 3 or 4 horn front lines he played in, he's well recorded, and you get to hear him now in a band context. Stompy Jones from 1940. I bet you if that had been an in-person performance, they would have kept going. They wouldn't.
Oh, sure.
Sounds like this got somebody gave
2.5 minutes and out. Pick it out, guys.
Yeah.
See, now again, when he got to his solo, he went right back into that wood block interpretation, the rims and the cowbells and all that. That was his thing, and he was a dancer. I mean, his style. I mean, you could call it because practically every solo I've ever heard him play, that's what he's done. Now, in the early days of recording, he had no choice. They wouldn't let him touch a drum, and you can even hear there, he's in the back part of the room. He's
Right.
separated. The drums are off a little bit in the distance there, and then all of a sudden, when he goes to a solo with the wood, with the metal and the wood, it comes through, and then it settles back into that snare drum, the press roll, which he played beautifully anyway, you know. And there's one 8-bar phrase there where he went to the ride cymbal. He played the ride cymbal, which had been going on which had started in the late 30s. I still think with Joe Jones, although they don't know who to really credit for that. But the first guy I heard do it was Joe Jones, with Basie Band, and he had a little small cymbal that he played on that I heard him play behind Prez, and which is really the question I laid on him that got him in that trouble that night when we first met, when I was an 8-year-old or a 9-year-old, something like that. But again, if you notice, Baby played at a perfect level. You know, that wasn't the recording engineers. They didn't really know how to. I mean, that was up to the drummer. You really had to do it because it was mono recording. All the balancing was done by the musicians in those days. It was one mic. So I mean, he played exactly at the right level. You hear what he's doing.
And I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing that'll reoccur more and more with as we go from one great drummer to another is the fact when they get to their solo work and the things they can do, they can throw in a lot of fancy things. But by and large, they when the band is playing, when the solos are going on, for the most part, they let it go. They let the they let the soloist tell a story and occasionally might add a comment or two.
Yeah.
But for the most part, they don't. They save the stuff for the solos, which seems to have, which is another thing that doesn't happen much anymore.
No, because everybody today, everybody's trying to play. Everybody plays a solo from the downbeats. They start soloing. Every drummers today have this idea that they have to be heard, or you might miss one of their ideas, so they stick every one they can think of into every. I mean, after a while, to me, it becomes absolute boredom after one chorus, because I said, well, I just heard him. I heard everything he knows. That ain't where it's at. I mean, the whole thing is to be an accompanist, and these guys knew what this was. This was accompaniment. He played, he swung the soloist.
Right.
He sat back there and just played under him. And when he got his turn, he took his turn. And that's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it was always meant to be, and that's the way it always should be. Now, how much you stick in depends on how much you can hear. And if you're really hearing, you'll put in only what's necessary. And if you can't hear, then, or you're not listening, then you're going to put in a whole bunch of nonsense, and that's what's going to come out, And the result is overplaying, It just doesn't make any sense. But that's one of the problems of today anyway, I mean, that's the difference between a lot of today's music. There's too much based on technique. How fast can I do this? How many notes can I get in? Like we were just saying before, how many notes can you get in one bar? But why can't you play 4 beats on the bass drum in one bar, even? I mean, figure that out. Guy can't play 4 beats with his bass drum, but he wants to find out how many he can get in with his hands. I mean, how fast can he play in 4 beats? But he can't play 4 beats.
Yeah,
that's strange.
Yeah,
that's what it's it.
Yeah,
and it wasn't that way in those days. These guys were built around teamwork.
It's funny. It's the same analogy as with horn players. With some who can play tremendously complicated chord progressions at fast tempos and doubling up on all the stuff, and meanwhile you ask them to play a ballad, just a plain old melody of a nice old tune, and it sounds like cats dying or something.
Yeah,
it's awful, and I think it's the same kind of principle. You can't crawl before you can walk, and but there's a lot of people who are doing it, I guess.
Yeah. No, the hardest thing in the world.
How did you learn about listening? I mean, was it something that just came naturally to you, or your dad?
No, it must have been. I think it was all natural because I can't recall being told anything about any of these things. I think it was just that I was such a listener. I just loved music. I think when you, anybody that, especially the guys like from my generation, and those who want to of today's, But in our day, I think the whole thing is hearing the music. I mean, it was so wonderful that you just became a listener. I mean, I listened to everything, and listening became my habit. So that when as I was playing, see, I don't remember how I started playing either. I just was playing. Now I was still listening. I don't recall ever not being a listener. So I guess as I played, I figured, well, I can't play unless I'm listening. That was just a natural reaction, was to listen and then as far as putting in, doing what they say, playing with taste or always. I've been accused of always doing the right thing. It's a nice accusation.
Yeah.
And but when they say, "How'd you get to be that way?" and I really can't answer it, is because I say from listening. I guess I always realized that if I start putting in too much or start putting in things that don't make any sense, then I'm not listening. Also, it takes away from my listening because I enjoy listening to the people I'm playing with. I mean, to me, music is a pleasure.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to sit back there and solo all night, then obviously I'm not listening to anything. Now, there are times when I'm playing a lot of stuff, but I'm hearing it because my ears are so trained. Like I can, but like I'll get behind like Joe Lovano, or, who plays, who's a Coltrane style tenor player, and he plays a lot of notes. Well, I want to give him what will inspire him.
Right.
But I'm still listening, and I feel like Elvin did behind Coltrane himself. I mean, you hear it and you supply the taste that belongs with it. And believe it or not, folks, you can hear. You actually can hear everything coming out, and you're not just playing away. But a lot of guys do. They just make a lot of noise, and it has nothing to do with what the player is playing. I'm really hearing every note he's playing, every direction he's going. I can hear him stop. I can hear him go. I can hear when he's going to... I will play more when he's playing less. I'll play less when he's playing more. Now, that comes from listening. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know it.
Yeah.
And this is from practice, which means from experience and all that. But if you're playing with somebody like a Lester Young style player, or swinging like on the record we played when we opened the show behind Ralph LaLama, who's playing very simple swinging lines, all I'm going to play behind, there's nothing goes better behind that other than that Chinese cymbal going ta ta ka ta ta ka ta, and getting a fine walk going through there.
Right.
That is the sound, with the bass walking on that and punctuations from the piano. Nothing, occasional little things coming out of the left hand. Very simple.
Right.
That is the taste. That's what should be happening behind that kind of a tenor solo. Now, if I were to play, I got all that space. Most young guys today would hear all that space would be playing a drum solo behind the man's tenor solo, which isn't going to endear themselves to anybody.
No.
You know.
We're talking with Mel Lewis. That's Mel Lewis's voice you're hearing, and he's here with me until 9 o'clock tonight, and again 6 to 9 next Wednesday and the next Wednesday on the history of jazz drums. It's 6:35. This is WKCR FM in New York, 89.9 on your FM dial, and we're talking off of hearing some Baby Dodds recordings. And for those of you who don't play or haven't heard that much music in person, I guess a good analogy might be with this listening business. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who you know is not listening to you? You're talking to them, and they're going, really.
Yeah.
Mm. That's exactly what it feels like when you're playing with someone in a band who's not listening, who's chattering away, and you know that they're not listening to a word you're saying.
That's it.
Yeah, and it's the same thing. Or if a rhythm section as a whole is playing too much behind a soloist, it's like hearing three people talking at the same time.
Exactly.
You can't tell what they're not listening to each other. You don't know what one person's saying. You can't tell. It's mass confusion.
No. And
Gosh,
see, drumming
you can't
is,
tell people.
No, drumming is you're one drummer. You're sitting behind an instrument that makes noise. I mean, it really does make noise. I mean, it can be loud. It can be, and when you're sitting behind cymbals and things like that, and you're chattering away behind a soloist that could be standing 4 feet in front of you,
right,
and maybe you really can't hear him. You have to strain to hear him. Well, what's the first thing you should do? Is cut your volume down.
Yeah.
That's number one. Because you have to hear over your drums,
Yeah. Well, that's another thing you do. But by the way, I'd like to apologize to the audience out there for the strange noises that are going on inside the studio. It sounds like...
Well, you know what causes that is because
The heat?
that's the heat. But half the radiators in this building are half turned on or half off instead of being one or the other.
Yeah, so that's what
And that's what creates all that noise.
weird
I
noise.
learned
One thing that I know Mel Lewis does, I don't know if we've talked about it, is that you play your drums. You play your drums so they sound. You tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I think you're right because I think I've heard you say it. But you play your drums so they sound right to the audience and to the people that are listening.
Right.
In other words, the way they sound exactly where you are at the drum set is not how they
No,
sound
that's right.
out there.
No.
And that's such a deep thing, and it would seem like a basic concept of drumming, but I guess a lot of drummers play drums so it sounds exactly how they want it to sound at the drum set.
I get the raw sound.
Right.
The raw sound comes in my ears, the pure sound. The sound of what a drum sounds like after it has traveled through space.
Right.
That's the sound everybody else hears. It's the same concept of hearing your own voice, that you do not sound the same as somebody you're talking to. They hear you differently.
Right.
You don't hear, none of us really ever hear. That's why we always scream when we hear ourselves on a playback or saying, "Oh, I hate my voice. I didn't know I sounded like that. I sound terrible." You don't sound terrible. It's just that you're not used to hearing yourself as you actually sound.
Right.
When you talk into a microphone, that sound that goes out, that's you. The sound you hear inside your head is not you. I mean, that's you, but that's as close as you're hearing it from another angle. That's the way I hear my drums, from inside.
Yeah.
But outside is what I'm concerned about, that sound. So if I get the drums to sound like I want them to sound out there, back here,
Right.
that means deadening them. That means actually killing the sound. So now I say, boy, my drums sound great here. They don't sound great out in front. Now they've lost it.
How do you know what calibrations to make? Just from experience or from listening to other drummers?
I guess from listening, because because when I used to sit out in front and listen to the drummers whose sounds I enjoy. The guys with the individual sounds. Max Roach, Art Blakey, Gene Krupa, Buddy Rich, Sid Catlett. Not just their style, but their sound. They all had a sound, And going up and playing, I've played on almost all their drums at one time or another,
Really?
and they don't sound like that out in front. Although I'm not going to get the same sound out of their drums anyway. But I know exactly. That's what, they got the same thing going. The drums are open, they ring, they know, But you don't hear that out in front. You hear a totally different situation. They've whether they talk about it or not, they know it.
Right. Whether it's
Yeah.
conscious or instinctive or whatever.
Yeah, if I got an opportunity to talk about it, that's what I'm doing, hopefully to help somebody. But if I didn't, I still know it regardless,
Let's go back to Baby Dodds and conclude our trio of selections from Warren Baby Dodds, the first drummer who has come up on this history of jazz drums. And this is a drum improvisation number 2, recorded the same day after the first one we heard, which was drum improvisation number 1. These are from January 1946. Baby Dodds.
Well, now, you see what he did there? He did played an introduction on the snare drum. He rolled. He used that in different variations as a change for each section where he changed. He played. He went right back into his tap dance routine with the wood blocks, with the wooden sounds, the rims, and at one point all of a sudden he threw in a little press roll on the end on the last two beats of a chorus, and then and proceeded to go into a 2/4,
Right.
where he doubled. So, but he stayed in the same tempo. After he finished that section, he made a very short pause, rolled again, and sent himself back into a 12, into a slightly brighter tempo, a triplet.
Right.
But every time, the rolls, by the way, they were smooth as silk each time. He had beautiful roll, and there was a consistency in that roll each time he played it. It was the same, basically the same volume. Again, he was here. We're going to change again, you know.
Right.
And same thing with the bass drum. See, it was a little louder than it was on the other one. It was heavier, but it stayed at that level. And but in each case, he tap danced.
Yeah, it did sound. I mean, I could see Bojangles Robinson.
He
or
was
something.
always going back to that dance. So that's what Baby liked. I mean, obviously that was his thing, and because he certainly he could have changed it at any time. He didn't. He never went into a snare drum solo. He didn't bother. You know, he used the rims were the thing, and it all sounded like good tap steps to me.
Yeah.
Kind of things that you heard Bojangles do later on, or before, I should say, or when used to hear the great dance teams, you know,
Yeah.
the type of things they would do, because they're all playing drums, you know. I remember Teddy Hale and Baby Lawrence and all these people, the ones that I grew up with, and the Step Brothers. They were the dancers of my generation.
Yeah.
The Nicholas Brothers. They all played drums.
Yeah, and there also seemed to be something melodic about the shapes of what he was
Right,
playing. I mean, I
right.
could hear kind of melodies in there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where it came from. Now they either picked up their steps from him, or he picked up his steps from them.
Or maybe a little bit of each.
Yeah, whatever, you know. But
Yeah.
but obviously he loved to dance, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, I hope that you know, when you listen to all he did with so little there, because it was just there was just nothing there. He really had very little to work with. And when you think about all these huge 15, 16-piece drum sets today that you see and you hear nothing coming out of,
Yeah.
you know, except digga 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 dong. I mean, it's all they play, you know. It's nothing. You know, no. I would wish that, yeah, the young rock drummers and the young drummers today will. I hope they will hear this. I hope they will listen to what I'm saying. I hope they will research these things and go out and find out what they're missing and find out why it's so important to listen to these things and to go to the library if they have to, whatever they have to do to get a copy of this kind of thing and study it, and to find out that what they're doing is really nothing and what this was art.
We should mention that these drum improvisations, number 1 and number 2, were originally on the Circle record label put together by Rudy Blesch, but they've been reissued and you can get them, and they're on a record label called the Audiophile record label, so you can go to your local jazz store and ask them for it. The name of this record, I believe, is just the Baby Dodds Trio, and it's on the Audiophile label, and that's out of Louisiana now. A man named George Buck has it. I'll try and get you the address before the end of the show, but if I don't, now you know it's on the Audiophile label under Baby Dodds' name. They are actually in print, believe it or not. The Stompy Jones with Sidney Bechet came from a series of recordings that were put out on the RCA label and that have been available in a variety of modes over the years. It's 6:47. Lauren Schoenberg here, and our very special guest this evening, Mel Lewis. Drummer Mel Lewis, of course, every Monday night at the Village Vanguard with the Jazz Orchestra, and this Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday at the Fortune Garden Pavilion with Steve Kuhn and Ron Carter
Right.
in the trio. and a lot of other things which you'll be told about as the gigs and as things come in. 6:48, our next drummer up is Zutty Singleton. And Zutty Singleton, again, a New Orleans drummer, early friend of Louis Armstrong's, and like Baby Dodds. Baby Dodds played with Louis on the Streckfus line on the steamboats back in the teens. There are photos about 1919 of bands with Louis and Baby Dodds playing. Zutty Singleton also played with Louis very early on and was very, very close and old-time friend of. You played with Rex Stewart, didn't you?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Yeah, in California, was it? Here?
I had a marvelous career. You know, I mean, if I had ever sit down and start putting it, I got to put it down on tape. Everybody I played with.
So you know, people that Baby Dodds recorded with, Mel Lewis recorded with,
Earl
and
Hines
played with her. Yeah, and a lot of these people, I was lucky enough to be friends with Zutty Singleton's wife, Marge. So these are. Just want to make the point clear that these are people who, most of whom Mel knew, a handful of who I had the pleasure of meeting. It's something real and alive, and I think it's important to say that, and it's not something to be thought of historically because you're listening to old records where it's not supersonic digital recordings, but these are real musicians and real things that have a lot to do with music today. I mean, people look at me like I'm nuts sometimes. I tell them, you can play any style of jazz. I say, if you know Louis Armstrong's records, if you can get that, if you can get that feeling or go after that feeling, I say you can play any kind of jazz from to the most contemporary to and they think they think I'm nuts for saying it sometimes. Who's they? But they do.
Yeah.
People who I might say it to, I try and tell them, but it's all so simple.
I know. You know, like I remember in California one time, I played with. I played on a Dixieland jamboree at a Hollywood Bowl where Louis' band was the headliner. The Dukes of Dixieland were there, and anyway, I appeared with Muggsy Spanier Saturday night, and I was recommended to him. He didn't know, but then he found out I was a bebopper, and he was scared, but he was shocked that he says, "How come you know all these things?" I said, "Because I do." You know, and he loved it. And when the gig was over, he says, "Can you work with us tomorrow night?" I says, "I can't. I'm playing with Dizzy at Royce Hall tomorrow night," which was true. I was playing. Dizzy came out. We were going to rehearse a big band to do a special concert the next day, and I was playing drums with him.
Muggsy Spanier one night and Dizzy the next.
You know. And and I remember all the guys, all these guys, you know. In fact, at that time was Barrett Deems was with Louis. And I remember them all coming over and saying, "What are you doing here?" I mean, you know, they were pretty surprised to see me on a Dixieland situation, you know. But what was I doing there? I was making my living.
Yeah.
You know.
Making music.
But I mean, I could do it, you know.
Yeah.
I was there. I didn't turn it down because I didn't want to appear playing Dixieland music. I loved it.
Yeah.
Those are the masters. You're playing with the best. Why, you know, and if you're there, you know, and they sound good, it's because you're sounding good. You got to know how to do it. That's all.
Yeah.
And I found it all works. You can mix it up all kinds of ways. The main thing is to swing and to listen.
Yeah.
You know.
As we'll find out later, probably in the second show next week when we get to the drummer, Big Sid Catlett.
Right.
You can play a record of Big Sid with Louis Armstrong, and very shortly before or after with Dizzy and Charlie Parker.
Right.
And playing the same basic style.
Yeah.
It fits.
He makes it fit.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
That's what they call having a nice, flexible style. That's all.
Yeah.
And that's what we all really want to have. That's what I have. You know. That's, to me, was the most important. How many people can I play with comfortably? You know.
Right.
That's it. You know.
Without being a chameleon.
No, you don't.
Right.
You know.
Right.
No. If you've got to turn it on and turn it off, that's no good.
Yeah.
You know. Then you're not being sincere at all.
It's 6:52. Right now we're going to go to Zutty Singleton, great drummer out of New Orleans. Again, early associate of Louis Armstrong's, made some very historic recordings with him. We'll begin with a couple of those early Armstrong-Singleton recordings, and we'll come back and talk with Mel, and then we'll launch into some later things, Zutty Singleton. With Louis Armstrong, this is Savoyagers Stomp, which is really kind of a big band version of Muskrat Ramble, Carol Dickerson's band with Louis Armstrong, Earl Hines, and Zutty Singleton inside of it. And then we'll go to one of the famous small group items where he's much more to the fore. Zutty Singleton.
I went down to St. James Infirmary, saw my baby there, stretched out on the long white table, so sweet, so cold, so fair. Let her go, God bless her. Wherever she may be, she can look this wide world over. She'll never find a sweet man like me. When I die, I want you to dress me straight leg shoes, box back coat and a Stetson hat. Put a $20 gold piece on my watch chain so the boys will know that I died standing pat.
Zooty Singleton with Louis Armstrong. We heard Savoyagers Stomp from July 1928, and he wasn't
Yeah,
playing much there.
No, on that track, it sounded like he wasn't playing any drum set at all, just a cymbal. And he laid out even on behind the tenor solo. I think everybody should have.
Including the tenor player.
Including the tenor player. But he played he played a backbeat on the opening chorus, and he just played, and it was just a perfect quarter note, on each one on the cymbal, and then he went into a dink dink a dink on behind the piano solo.
Right.
And that's about all he did on that. He didn't. He laid out about half the arrangement, but there was no drums actually.
Right.
Just
a
a cymbal on that first piece.
It's worth noting that, as Mel alluded to when we were talking about Baby Dolls before, that they didn't allow them to record drums up until a certain point because they were scared that it was going to knock the needle off the thing. And I think Gene Krupa was one of the very first.
Well, he was the first to use a bass drum.
Right.
And
we have that record here.
And he raised hell about it. He said, "I'm going to use it." I understand it was an argument, a scene. He proved to the guy that it could be used.
Yeah.
Because they just had this idea that it couldn't, and they were going to fight and fight. And it's the same scene we go through today with engineers where they feel they got to what they call tight mic you. They put the mic right on the drum, then they come out and say your drums are ringing too much, deaden them. I say get those mics away from the drums, then you don't have to. See, it's just a matter of will. Who's going to win?
Yeah.
In my case, I always win because I'll walk out the door if I don't win. So I got to win.
Yeah.
But you have to fight with these young engineers because they don't know. All they know is dead. And this whole idea of tight miking means they have control. Now, in those days, where everything was done with it was like a horn type of mic, and they were so afraid of that bass drum knocking everything out, Maybe it did in the beginning when they first experimented with it,
Yeah.
But there has to come a time,
That's when that change happened from the acoustical recording, where they did use the horns, to these recordings, which were the early electrical recordings.
Yeah.
And they just had to learn, someone had to tell them.
And you needed somebody to finally put his foot down, and it turned out to be Gene,
Yeah.
And he had the power, but he did it before he became the big name that he became.
Well, he was a nobody when he did it.
But he still did it.
Yeah. It's 2 minutes after 7. You're tuned in to WKCR-FM in New York, 89.9 on your FM dial. The show is Jazz Alternatives. It's heard Monday through Friday from 6 to 9 p.m. Wednesday night is an edition called The Musician Show, where we have a musician guest host, and our musician guest host is Mel Lewis. My name is Lawrence Schoenberg, and Mel is taking us through the history of jazz drums for the next 2 Tuesdays after this, next 2 Wednesdays after this one. So we have a lot of great music to look forward to. The second track we heard was one from recorded a little bit before that, but with a small group. Maybe that's what made the difference, why they let him bring in the bass drum.
Well, I don't know. Whatever happened.
That was the St.
And
James.
he started off, he started off very lightly with the bass. You could hear the bass drum distant in the beginning, and then when he went to the brushes, they apparently opened it up to pick up the brushes.
Yeah, you could hear the
And
brushes.
you could hear it, and then the bass drum came through better too.
Yeah.
And to me, it was a nice, clean sound all the way.
That was the St. James Infirmary, Louis Armstrong and Earl Hines, and some people known as the Savoy Ballroom 5, arranged by Don Redman, and Mancy Carr on banjo, Zooty on the drums, Fred Robinson trombone, Jimmy Strong clarinet, Don Redman alto sax and a little bit of clarinet maybe, and Louis Armstrong, Earl Hines. I'd say very clean, modern way of playing the bass drum and the brushes.
And the brushes, Don't forget there was no hi-hat in those days. They didn't have the hi-hat. And he got and brushes. Well, brushes had been around a while, but
what kind of brushes were they in those days?
Oh, those were
metal.
Those were metal. Those were the good ones. They
Yeah.
were good brushes. Well, everything was made well in those days. That's why the equipment lasted so long too. Today there's an awful lot of junk being made. Just for looks. It's like cars. They look good, but they don't sound good, or they don't hold up.
Yeah.
And they're not really made for sound. They don't. But mainly they don't sound good. Yeah.
Yes. It just seems that it's so apparent when a drummer's doing the right thing. I mean, it seems so natural when a drummer's doing the right thing. It's only when, I guess, a drummer's doing the wrong thing that it becomes really apparent of that they're doing something. And his level of snare drum and the brushes and the bass drum was just beautiful.
Perfect.
Just
It was
perfect.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's one thing I just want to underline for the drummers who haven't heard these kind of recordings before. Caution you not to be condescending or think that these are simplistic recordings. Zooey Singleton was a great artist, and it's obvious from the level and from the way he knew what he could accomplish on these recordings, and he did it to the hilt, I think.
We all had to do this. You know, when I made my first recordings, I didn't make till professional recordings. I made in 1949.
Or Tex Beneke.
And with Ray Anthony's
Ray
band, and and it was recorded mono on disc, direct to disc, 2.5-minute recordings. I had to go through the routines with the engineers of putting the drums too far away from the band and fighting for my way back into the middle of the room by playing as soft as possible, so soft that the band couldn't hear me. And then the band complained, and then they brought me closer and closer, and as I kept getting closer, I kept playing softer. Until finally, when they got me right where I should be, then I played normal, and nobody said a word.
Right.
And everything came out fine. But simplicity was still the norm. And, I knew it was the kind of situation where you played simply, That's why I used to say, you got to hear, it's like hearing Joe Jones with the Basie Band live and hearing Joe Jones playing with the Basie Band on record was two different things.
What was different?
He played less on the record session. He played it. Everybody took it easy because nobody was going to take any chances.
Right.
That's why when a drum solo came along, like Shadow Wilson's drum solo on Queer Street, everybody went nuts. They went ape. Hey, did you hear that?
Right.
Yeah. Why? All of a sudden, is something so terrific, and you wonder why didn't this happen before? Because everybody heard all these guys playing fantastic things live, but nobody did it in a recording studio.
Right.
Because if he would have messed it up, that's a tape.
Cost, right?
It would have cost money.
Right. Yeah. I
See,
remember I had a friend of yours, Jimmy Maxwell, here once, and he was talking about the same principle about when he first was recording with the overdubbing and all that kind of stuff, and the band leader said to him, "Well, take it easy. You don't have to make the high notes on this one. We'll punch it in later." And it was absolutely unheard of to him. He thought that every time you played was for real. I mean, there was no such thing as coasting or dubbing in, and the way that relates to what you were talking about in the old days of '78 RPM recording was
if you made
soloists
a mistake,
and people didn't really want to go way out on a limb, because if you made a mistake,
you had to start all over.
Start again, and those things were $50 each. I understand the old biscuits.
On top
and they used
of
to
which,
charge the band leader sometimes, right?
on top of which, the band, if you're playing the arrangement and you got it swinging, and then all of a sudden the drummer does something stupid, like drop a beat or something like that, or somebody hits a terrible clam,
Right.
and they'd stop you. You had to start all over again, and maybe never get that feel back that you just had.
I'm
It's
sure.
it happened plenty of times. So the whole idea was, I'll keep it simple and not worry about it.
Right.
And that's really what it amounted to.
It's a nice principle, actually.
Yeah.
Because then when you go to hear the band in person, you'd be
Oh,
like flabbergasted
of
with all
course.
this extra stuff.
Sure. But
Yeah.
today it's a different story, because now you can get away with anything in a recording studio.
Oh, it's unbelievable. Let's get back to Zooey Singleton, and we'll listen to 3 recordings that really showcase him well. One is a very historic recording. It's worth mentioning that Zooey was one of the few drummers who recorded with Louis Armstrong, Roy Eldridge, and Dizzy Gillespie, and at important stages of their career. He recorded with Dizzy in '45, with Roy in '36,
Uh-huh.
and with Louis in '28. And so we'll hear.
See, now that's wonderful. I
Yeah.
think.
Oh yeah, it's a
It's
phenomenal.
marvelous.
We'll hear the famous After You've Gone, the original Roy Eldridge, After You've Gone, not the one with Gene Krupa's band, but the original one that turned Dizzy on to it. And a lot of young trumpet players. I mean, this was it for jazz trumpet in 1936. Every trumpet player was copying these records. We'll hear Roy Eldridge, After You've Gone, with Zooey on drums. And then we'll hear him with his own band, with Zooey's own band, with Red Allen, Benny Morton, Edmund Hall, and friends doing the King Porter Stomp with a nice drum solo. And then a trio tune where he does some tom-tom work that where we can bring up the influence that Baby and Zudi had on Gene Krupa. This is the kind of thing that Gene eventually turned into Sing, Sing, Sing. We'll hear him do something called About Face. And, of course, that was his nickname was Face, with Pee Wee Russell and Joe Sullivan. Zudi Singleton.
After you gone and left me sighing, after you gone, left me crying, you feel sad, you feel bad, you've never met the best found that very rad. There'll come a time, no more forgetting, babe. There'll come a time, no more regretting. Oh, baby, look what you're doing. Seems to me, drive my heart to ruin. After you've gone away.
Zooty Singleton in 3 settings. Let's talk about the first one first, the one with Roy Eldridge, the famous After You've Gone, that Dizzy Gillespie and so many people loved that record.
Well, that's obviously. I mean, it's classic. Roy is something else on that. The thing really got swinging even harder after the vocal.
Yeah.
You know, actually, it started out well, like anything. You know, it just didn't just plop right in and start swinging hard. But you know, and this is a case now where Zooty played. It snared him all the way. You know, it's all press roll. You know, and at a at that tempo, that's a good tempo for those days. You know, they didn't play real fast tempos in 4, and it's in 4.
Right.
And the sound. See, he got a wonderful sound on his snare drum, you know, and he's playing the snare drum with press rolls and a backbeat at the same time. Where he's hitting the rim while he's playing the roll.
On 2 and 4.
On 2 and 4.
Yeah.
Which gives it that the roll gives it the propulsion, and the backbeat gives it, you know, that high. Yeah.
So it was interesting. There were a lot of trumpet breaks on that performance, and how Zooty left the space open
He
and
left
just
the
came
space
back
completely open and came in only on 4. He never came in too far in. He waited and hit on 4, and then in they came.
in. Yeah, it was really swinging.
Yeah, that was great. And then the
King Porter
the
style?
King Porter was a totally different approach. I mean, he sounded like a different guy altogether there, I thought. And in fact, I think he was playing. I think he was playing some. He was playing some. I thought I heard some hi hats on there, you know, but I don't know if they were open. They might have been closed. But I swear he was playing some hi hats there, a little bit. But he also was playing. But when he got to the ensemble, he went back to that snare drum again.
Yeah. And he also played a lot of. He played a nice solo on there with the snare drum.
The solo was great. He almost threw the band. He almost threw them with his presence. He got a little fancy. I didn't think it was anything that far out, but apparently they didn't expect it. And you could hear there was a little bit of there was a shaky downbeat, and he immediately got out of that and went into a straight military type of thing and brought them in.
Yeah.
With a normal bring in, you know. I mean, he brought them in with a ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba type of thing, you know.
Right.
So we're not going to break. We're not going to ruin this tape.
Right.
Yeah.
Should mention the soloists on there: Red Allen, trumpet Benny Morton, trombone Edmund Hall, clarinet Lil Armstrong on piano, Bernard Addison guitar, Pops Foster bass, and Zooty Singleton on the drums on that version of St. James Infirmary.
Right.
And then we heard the tom-tom
That
piece.
was a version of King Porter's Tom.
What did I say?
You said St. James Infirmary.
Oh, that's
And
right.
the tom-tom piece was, yeah, you're right. It was sort of a forerunner of what would be Sing, Sing, Sing.
Right. It actually was recorded after Sing, Sing, Sing was done. But, of course,
Well, if it was-
Zooty had been doing those things for years.
Yeah,
That
I
was
mean,
Pee Wee Russell,
well, it wouldn't
Joe
have been a
Sullivan.
forerunner then, but it was similar, and but you could also hear, you know, something else. There was the sound of leather, as I call it. You know, the sound he got out of the tom toms and the bass drum at that point was more leathery.
Mhm.
You
What-
know,
what do you
Well,
mean
it
by
was calfskin? You know, as opposed to what you hear today on plastic. You know, there's a big difference in the sound of what tom toms sound like today with the plastic.
Were you ever on the right coast at the right time to hear Zooty Singleton?
Oh, sure.
Oh, you saw him in person?
Yeah, I saw him in person.
Yeah.
I saw him in California too. He was living. He spent some time out there.
Yeah.
I saw him I saw him at. Where did I see him? But I did see him out there. I know I used to see him around the ranch market, hanging around.
What was the
Where all the
ranch?
musicians used to hang out.
Yeah.
There's a place called the Ranch Market. It was a late hour spot over on Vine Street, down from where the Union was, where everybody used to go down there late at night after work and hang out and get hot dogs and things like that. You know.
One thing that struck me there on both those last tunes was the fact that both Gene Krupa and Big Sid, I know for a fact, really dug Zooty Singleton and Baby Dodds. And I think a lot of the things that Sid and Gene and a lot of the other drummers, but those two in particular, and Lionel Hampton too could do it, I think, sometimes in the old days when he used to play real drums, seem to be reminiscent of those facts. Did Gene ever mention to you about the fact that he liked Zooty
Oh,
Singleton?
sure, yeah. He talked about him a lot, and I saw Zooty here in New York. In my road days when I first came into town on the road. He was still working around some of these
Jimmy Ryan's
yeah,
and-
the places over here on the west side, and I walked in. I used to walk in for a minute, then they throw me out because I didn't drink, and I was alone, and I was underage too, so
you
combinations.
were undesirable.
Yeah, but I got to hear some of it, and so I got to hear him live, probably maybe 3 times.
What kind of equipment what kind
all-
of setup would these guys have?
These guys, I noticed that they all used big bass drums. I didn't see any of them with a small bass drum.
Right.
They used big bass drum, a snare drum, a bass drum, usually one tom-tom over on the right-hand side, and 2 cymbals up on top, and no small tom-tom, because there was no room on the bandstands anyway, and no hi-hat. Now, I saw Zooty without a hi-hat. I saw George Wedling without a hi-hat,
Really?
and oh yeah, and
That must have been strange to see a drum set with no hi-hat.
and I saw Zooty at the Metropole.
Right.
He worked the Metropole for a
A
while.
lot, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that joint. I used to go in there, and but it's funny. I had reached a point. Gene would be working there, and Zooty. They'd all be on the same bill, and a lot of times I'd walk in when Gene was playing, and then when he'd get off, he'd go up to his room. I'd go up and hang with him, and I could hear it through the floor, And then there were other times we'd say, "Let's go down and watch Zooty," and we just go down and listen to him with Red Allen,
Yeah.
because Red Allen used to work there a lot too.
One of the pet theories I've had, and I should mention we're talking with Mel Lewis. This is the Musicians Show on WKCR FM New York, 89.9 your FM dial. I think that guy came in and switched to Magic Button. I think I don't hear all those banging noises anymore.
Oh, that's right.
And one of my pet theories about jazz is that it's all from the beginning of it to where we are now. It's the greatest of it, the best of it, has a lot more in common than it has different.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
the best of it from the old days and from the recent days, the best of it is all much closer together than far apart. And of course, the history books and the fan magazines and the various things that young musicians might read coming up, and record liner notes, if they're not written by good people, would lead you to believe that there's a huge chasm there. But I mean, what came across when you saw someone like Zooty Singleton play? I mean, did you feel like it was something ancient, or like it was
No,
something
that's the wild thing about it.
real?
Is that you never felt that way that's the thing about live music. See, when you listen on a record, you're looking at techniques of that period. So recordings that were made years ago sound like they were made years ago, and it makes the thing sound ancient. It makes it sound like an old style. Whereas if you heard it live at that time, it sounded modern.
Right.
And you didn't notice anything ancient about it at all, because there was no technology involved. So if you were there, it was. See, and then as the more modern cats, don't forget at that same time, I was hearing the modern cats. I was hearing everybody at one time. So it didn't matter where you went to hear it. What you heard was a big, fat, full sound coming out of all of them, just doing their thing.
Yeah.
The styles were different, but the sound was full and fat and warm,
Swinging, hopefully.
and always swinging,
Yeah.
And and actually you hear less of that today. Today you can hear some. Today, when you go down to the Vanguard, we'll use the Vanguard because that's my home. To hear, say, Buddy Tate, who I hope is all right, by the way. To go hear a Buddy Tate and his quartet, or with Al Gray or something. Now they're playing that school. That's the style of music they're playing, and man, it sounds wonderful, And that's the way it was. It sounded just as wonderful then. It still sounds wonderful. And then you go back in the following week and you hear Charles McPherson or somebody, and it sounds wonderful. It's that same sound, only it's different guys playing different style.
Right.
But the overall sound is is the same. I mean, you get the same amount of the impact is the same. It's swinging differently, but just as fat, just as full.
Yeah.
And the drummers might be louder.
Right.
Today's drummers play too loud.
So yes, certainly amplification has wrought havoc
Yeah.
in the jazz band and in the jazz rhythm section.
Yeah. Well, the bass player's using amps, and so the drummer's playing. Everybody's playing louder.
Well, their piano
And
player.
the piano has to be mic'd with 2 mics in it instead of 1, and so on. And it just gets, you're listening to acoustic, but I think Phil Woods has the right idea when he goes into a club. He just sets everything off. And it works.
Some piano players now, and I don't mean to fault them because some of the piano players who do it are very talented, but I've seen piano players show up for a gig with their own monitor system.
Yeah, I've seen those.
A piano player shows up usually.
Oh, you mean you can't hear yourself?
One of the
on a
great
piano?
things about playing piano was that you never had to bring anything to the gig.
Yeah.
And you got to bring in a truckload of 2 microphones and
for
2
what?
speakers.
You mean you can't
in
hear
a
yourself?
small room.
You mean you
I-
don't know what you're playing and you can't hear yourself?
I had a rehearsal once with a pianist, a piano and a singer, in a small apartment, and the singer insisted on using a mic and an amp. Strange.
Wow.
That's weird. 7:29. We're talking with Mel Lewis. This is the history of jazz drumming and 1,000 other topics, all related to jazz drumming. As we sit here with one of the all-time masters and great jazz drummers, and a jazz historian, in the sense that he lived through it, knew these gentlemen, heard the music, and is very well suited to tell us about it and hopefully share it with our listeners. 7:30 WKCR FM New York, 89.9 on your FM dial. My apologies to those of you who might be trying to call and get through, but the phones here are furnished, whatever the word is. They don't,
That's a good word.
they don't work as of now. We can call out, but you can't call in. So again, my apologies, because I know there are a lot of folks who'd like to talk to Mel. Hopefully, when we're back next Wednesday night for part 2 of this 3-part special, you'll be able to hear it. I'd like to mention that on my regularly scheduled Tuesday afternoon out to lunch, which is every other Tuesday now, next Tuesday, the 17th, my guest will be Rich Conady from WFUV's. Well, I guess he didn't fix it. WFUV's The Big Broadcast will be here next Tuesday afternoon. And 2 weeks after that, the 31st, my guest will be Bobby Pring, and we'll be doing part 4 on Jack Jenny. A little bit of program notes for you. But up front and center, Mel Lewis and the history of jazz drumming. We're halfway through the show. We've talked and listened to music by Baby Dodds, Zooty Singleton. And right now we're going to turn to a gentleman who, even in relation to these gentlemen, is much less known. I'm wondering if there's anything you can do to introduce the listeners to Ben Pollack.
Well, I mean, I met Ben too. I knew Ben. I met him. I knew him. I heard him play on the coast, because he owned a place out there. He owned a nightclub, and he also used to hang around at the ranch market after work, and he was. And he had a band. He had a band that I think Gene Krupa played in, as a matter of fact. Yeah, when Ben didn't do his own drumming, I think he hired outside drummers later on. But and he played. He was out of Zooty and Dodds and these people. And Ben had a good reputation back in the 30s. And
I know he first came to 4 in Chicago with the New Orleans Rhythm Kings
yeah.
in the early 20s, and he was supposedly one of the first white drummers who was really swinging. And of course, he was famous for having Harry James, and then before that, Benny Goodman and T. Garden and Glenn Miller
Right.
and all those people in his band too.
Right. I'm not too up on his history that much, but I know that he could play, and he got. They talked about him a lot. When I was a youngster, I used to, in the early Downbeat magazine when it first came out. His name was in there a lot.
Yeah.
And of course, the magazine was out of Chicago.
Which helped.
But Zooty's name was in there a lot. These were the people. These were the first people that you heard, and of course I used to hear most of them on the radio, And then and when I got to finally see them, it was in their fading years. They had been around for so long already. That's the other sad part, is that they made history, and they never and when people were when there was an audience for them, they weren't here long enough.
Yeah.
To really show what they had done, you know, and they didn't have a big enough audience during the period they were actually making it.
Yeah.
When they were creating what came afterwards. See, that's the sad part. Is
Yeah.
they didn't have enough time on this earth for the recognition.
Yeah. Well, Baby Dodds, I think, wasn't that long-lived. Zudi was well into his 70s, I think, or maybe
Yeah,
early
yeah,
80s.
but I mean, but still, he wasn't heard that much. I mean,
Right.
you know,
Right, those
he was
later years.
around, but he wasn't playing that much.
Yeah.
There wasn't that many places for the style. I mean, everything changes so fast in this country. You know, it's,
Oh, yeah.
you know, you don't get a chance to get something really going, and it's replaced right away. Somebody else comes up with another idea.
One nice thing was, though, a handful of jazz artists from the swing era, especially some who became big band stars in the 30s and 40s, like Krupa or Harry James. There's a issue of Downbeat I've seen from 1940 where they gave Harry James the #1 trumpet
Oh yeah,
guy.
but see, it
And
was big band. The big bands.
I know, but I just wanted to make the point that he says on the cover of Downbeat magazine, they say, Harry James refuses trumpet pole winner award. And then you open it up and it says, Harry James, when notified the fact that he had won the #1 trumpeter in the world award, said, I feel like an idiot taking this award when Louis Armstrong is out there playing. Send it to him.
That's right.
And there were a lot of interviews with Gene Krupa, too, where he'd really talk about Zudi a lot.
Yeah.
And,
Gene never, you know, they used to talk about Gene's ego and all that. Well, he used to have his scenes with Buddy and all that. I mean, that was hype, you know.
Right.
It created good publicity. It created attention. But when it got down to music, he felt that Chick Webb and Zudi and Baby Dodds, he talked about them all the time. They were the masters.